History of Venice, like the city itself, is unique. Inhabitants from the neighboring TV mainland seeking refuge from the savage barbarians who conquered Italy after the fall of the Roman Empire, the history of Venice began with the Venetian lagoon offering a refuge for these people. Book now. The history of Venice begins around 400 AD. The first people to settle in the Venetian lagoon were frightened men coming from the nearby Italian mainland. For centuries these people had enjoyed prosperous lives in a chain of splendid cities of the Roman Empire strung along the northeastern shores of the Adriatic. But, in the early years of the 5th century, with the collapse of the Roman Empire and barbarians sweeping down from northern Europe, their communities were thrown into chaos. The populations of these towns fled before the Goths, seeking a refuge where their enemies could not follow them. And so, the history of Venice began. As further waves of invaders swept across the mainland, more and more people sought sanctuary in the channels and shoals of the lagoon. Although, as each wave of invaders passed, some people would return to the mainland to try to resume their own lives. According to tradition, Venice formally came into existence at the stroke of noon on the 25th of March 421 AD. But, it wasn't until around 450 AD that large numbers of people decided to settle permanently in the lagoon. The arrival of Attila the Hun, and the devastation his forces caused on the mainland were enough to help the inhabitants finally realize that to try to continue to live on the mainland was no longer possible. In fact, many of the refugees found their new lives in the lagoon more congenial than they had expected. Living in a refuge that was both unviable and inaccessible, where their enemies lacking both ships and a knowledge of sea could not follow, the geographical isolation of these early Venetians enabled them to enjoy an independence from the successive upheavals by which Italy was now being shaken. Early Venetians lived like seabirds, their land secured only by osier and wattle. The one great wealth that the Venetians enjoyed was the fish and salt from the lagoon, which gave them the power to purchase those things that they did not possess. For nearly 1,400 years, the 2 or 3 miles of shallow water separating Venice from mainland Italy had not only protected Venice from invaders but effectively isolated the Venetians from the Italian political life. Untouched by the papalist and imperialist warfare, feudalism and territorial squabbles, they fixed their attention towards the east and the rich markets of the Levantine and Constantinople. And so began the great mercantile empire of the Venetian Republic. A city built from fear, was soon to be heralded as the most dazzlingly beautiful city in the world. While the Florentines were regarded as great thinkers, the Venetians should be regarded as great doers. For they alone conquered the malaria-ridden swamps to build a city from nothing. Our original Venice walking tour is the perfect introduction to Venice, through which the first-time visitor is subtly introduced to the beauty and complex history of the world's longest existing republic. The architectural and artistic treasures to be found throughout the city of Venice reflect a continual process of enrichment through which the Venetians showed their great sense of nationalism at a time when the rest of Europe was in chaos. Our Doge's Palace Walk introduces you to the political and social institutions that made Venice by far the most liberal and free state in Europe during the Middle Ages. Along with the richly decorated chambers of the palace that provide the perfect introduction to the great artists of Venice. Modern-day Venice is still an intriguing and mystifying city to visit. Its great history seems to reason on throughout the whole city. Traditions and festivals continue throughout the calendar year, marking events from the rich history of Venice, the Queen of the Sea.